Hello. How high is your emotional IQ? Can you raise it a few points? Welcome to our Leadership Professional Development Series to help you speak, sound, and look like a leader. Let's talk today about how to harness the power of your emotions for effective leadership. I'm Linda Katz-Wilner, founder of Successfully Speaking, and I work with leaders and aspiring leaders to help them improve their executive presence and their communication skills. And today, our guest is Dr. Irvine Nugent. Irvine is the partner of at COPIA Leadership. Irvin and I are both members of the DC chapter of the National Speakers Association, and I always love speaking to him about nonverbal communication and emotional IQ. Welcome, Irvin.
Thanks, Linda. Appreciate it. Excited about our conversation.
I am so excited to speak to you about this, Irvin. And Irvin, why don't we start with what is emotional IQ?
Well, emotional intelligence, the best way I like to explain this is an ability of a person to do four things. First of all, there is self-awareness. So how self-aware am I in the emotional domain, aware of my emotions? The second thing then is knowing what I'm feeling. How well do I manage those emotions? Then we're going to go external. And the third element is how aware am I of other people's emotions, how they show up? Can I connect with other people? And then bringing everything together is how do I manage the different relationships in my life, especially when we have emotional topics to discuss. And the more emotionally intelligent we are, the better we tend to manage those relationships.
And Irvin, I think I know the answer to this, and most people probably do, but can you improve? Because it's hard to improve your intellectual IQ, but
Yep.
can you improve your emotional intelligence?
Well, I have good news for everyone. Absolutely. So your IQ kind of taps out in your early 20s, your emotional intelligence. Most people, hopefully, through their experience, begin to grow their emotional intelligence as they go out their adult life. But if you specifically hone in on some of these skill sets, you can absolutely improve the extent of your emotional intelligence skills.
Okay. And that's hope. That's good news. That's
Very
certainly
good
good
news.
news. And why is it so important for us to have that awareness of our emotions when we're communicating with somebody, be it in our personal life or at work?
So it's a great question. I think there's a fallacy out there, and the fallacy is that I don't want to get overly emotional, and if I'm emotional, everything's going to break down, and let's just have reason and rationality.
Mhm.
And the problem with that is, of course, it's not the way we're created as human beings. We're created, yes, as rational beings, but also emotional beings. So emotions, whether you realize it or not, is absolutely part of everything we do. And if we are not aware of those emotions, then in many ways, we can get ourselves into situations, say things, do things that we'll regret later. So what we
Mhm.
really want to try and do is to be able to be aware and manage those emotions so that we can achieve the goal of any conversation or relationship that we're in.
Mm, that is so important because
Mm.
we can't eliminate our emotions.
No.
Right? We're not robots, and I think the people who don't show any emotions, we don't connect as well with them.
Absolutely. Yes, because emotion is part of that. We're hungering for feedback from another person. One of the toughest thing to do is to have a conversation with a person where we're getting no affect back.
Mhm.
And it almost destroys the conversation. You almost can't go on. So it just shows you how emotions are so built in to
Mm.
everything that we do.
And something that I'm so tuned into is if you and I are looking at each other right now on camera or
Mhm.
when we're in person, but when we're on that phone call
Yeah.
or somebody doesn't open their camera, we can't always read their emotions.
Yeah.
Right?
It is much more difficult.
Mhm.
However, your emotions are conveyed through a number of different channels. So obviously, our eyes, sight is important, but also the voice is incredibly important. So
Mhm.
even if we're on the phone, like when I'm with a client, I don't know about you, Linda, when I'm with a client, if that client is down or there's just something lacking there, it comes through in their voice and you can have a really interesting conversation. I'm picking something up. Tell me a little bit more. So even in our voice, the emotion, of course, is conveyed.
That's funny you said that, Irvin, because years ago, before we ever did virtual
Mm,
meetings, I was
yeah,
working with a client and it was a phone call.
yeah,
And she was giving, it was an attorney and she was giving a speech and I was coaching her. And I said, that was very good, but you need to smile.
yeah,
And she said, how do you know I'm not smiling? And I said, I hear it in your voice.
yeah, absolutely.
You
Yeah,
don't need to see, you're right. You don't need to see it. And I always tell people, smile when you pick up that phone because people hear the brightness in your voice when you do smile. So,
absolutely. Yes.
but sometimes we don't have that extra way of reading that person, which challenges us. And then again, this is in my wheelhouse. The voice is so important.
Absolutely, yes. And obviously, the more channels we have to us, the better and the more nuanced and the more accurate we can get. But even without some of those channels, it's still possible to read emotions.
And sometimes, Irvin, we get so emotionally triggered
Mhm.
when we're communicating. You talked about management of emotions. How can we manage that? We're so
Yeah.
upset what somebody just said to us in the
Yeah.
meeting.
And I think it's first of all, the thing I always say when I work with clients, it's very important to realize the business environment we're in. I mean, we are in a time of unprecedented change. And I think we don't appreciate how difficult that is to
Mhm.
manage day in, day out. So there are many different opportunities every day for us to be triggered. And so the first element there, Linda, is we have to really recognize what triggers us.
Mm,
And I often find that people that have extreme reactions, when you ask them about their reactions, they're not aware of they went off, they argued or whatever. So there's a word I use, which is trigger print. So just as we have a fingerprint, we also have a
mhm,
trigger print. So can we take some time and explore what is it? And normally we have to do this after the event. And so it's always great upon reflection. When we have a reaction or a response or a behavior that really wasn't helpful, just take a little bit of time and say, what just happened there? What got
mm,
me going? And then through that exploration, we begin to find out, oh, so, I was just working with a client a few weeks ago. One of their triggers is they go to a weekly meeting and there's a person in that meeting that constantly talks over them
mm,
and it shuts them down. And so as we explored that, we kind of explored, oh, there it is. And then, when you do a little bit of layering upon that as well, why did it get you so upset? Well, because that's disrespectful. So there's a value that is being violated, a respect for another person. So all of this is great fodder for examination and can really help us then
mhm,
create that awareness so that when it happens again, we can give ourselves some choices.
mm. And I was going to ask you to give an example, but that's it, right? In a meeting, somebody gets
Yeah,
upset. And
absolutely.
I'd be curious. Years ago, I was giving a workshop and somebody asked me this question. And a
Mm,
lot of it is physical, but it's also emotional
mm,
reactions. And she said she went to a meeting and she had to report to somebody, but she really thought that he did not know what he was talking about.
mhm,
And so when they get in the meeting, she found herself getting very frustrated and turning red.
mhm,
And she said to me, how can I prevent that? And I said,
mm.
wow, I had some suggestions, but that was a tough one.
Yeah.
Obviously, she had an emotional reaction, but it was so transparent that people could see how upset she was. What do you think somebody should do in that situation?
Well, I think first of all, let's just recognize that emotions happen so quickly; they are outside our conscious awareness at their very beginning. So
Mhm,
there's no such thing as stopping an emotion.
mhm,
And so what happens, of course, when emotions begin, they have a physiological component. So just say with the example there, just say the reaction was anger. I'm not sure what it was, but just say
mhm,
it was anger. Then when we get angry, I like to say like a train begins and all these physiological happenings occur. And part of that, of course, is pumping blood. And for
mhm,
some people, that is going to show on the face. And you can't stop that because it happens so quickly. Now, when you become aware that perhaps say you're angry, etc., you can begin to say use some breathing techniques or other techniques to calm down, and eventually, the blood will drain and regulate, etc. But there's no way just to stop it because you don't want to stop it. I believe that emotions are beautiful. There are messages to us, and very often we get a message of positive or negative emotions. I don't like those words. I just say
mhm,
emotions have a gift of a message to us. And I think, we just have to live with them. And so I think it's very hard in that case
Mhm.
to stop something that is very spontaneous.
Well, I'm happy to hear that what I said to her were two things. One was stop and breathe,
Yeah.
because the breathing calms you down, just like it does if you're nervous about public speaking.
Mhm.
But the other thing I mentioned to her was get into that other person's head if you can, and that
Mm,
person thinks he knows what he's talking about.
yeah.
You may not agree,
Yep.
but he thinks he does. So if you pull yourself away from it a little bit and try to get in that other person's perspective, perhaps it calms you down. I don't know that it does,
Yeah.
but it was one strategy I thought of.
And I like that second strategy as well, because that strategy then what I would call as an empathic strategy. So that, in other words, you're also helping not just to calm down, but you're also preparing for what would our response be.
Mhm,
So our response could be like an anger response. Oh, you're an idiot. You don't know what you're doing. But now it's kind of like, oh, I understand a little bit where he's coming from. So let me just nuance how I'm going to react.
mhm. Even if you don't agree.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So that brings me to my next question. There are often times, especially for leaders, that they have to have some very difficult
Mhm.
conversations that they
Mhm.
know may have a reaction with the person they're speaking to. How do you best prepare for something
Mm.
like that?
It's a great conversation. So first of all, I would just say, as a leader,
Mhm,
know your conflict story. And what I mean by that is some people have real no problems with conflict, but other times they do. So just to realize that if you're averse to conflict, you're going to even avoid those conversations. And I often find that leaders get themselves in trouble because they don't have the conversations they need to have. And part of that is they don't want to. Second thing I would just say is, so often we focus on how am I going to start this conversation? What are the
mhm,
right words? And we focus on the words, which of course are critical, they're important. But what I find often is not reflected upon is what emotions am I
mhm,
bringing to this conversation? What emotions might arise within me and what emotions might arise within the other person? So, say, for example, if it's a very sensitive conversation and the other person might be angry. So, therefore, you have to prepare that this person could be angry. It could be displaced anger, it could be anger on you. Can you sit with that?
mhm,
Are you prepared just to be with that anger, knowing that the cause of that anger could be many different things? And you're maybe not the cause. Maybe it's a wider situation that you're the bearer of bad news.
mhm,
But to be prepared to be able to, you know what, I just have to learn to sit with another person's emotions. One of the great skills of emotionally intelligent person is the ability to personally sit with difficult emotions and honor them, and also to be able to sit with another person and not find a need to answer. This is what we try to, we have a need to solve the problem. I have to
mhm,
solve their anger. No, it is absolutely appropriate that they're angry. They're
mhm.
receiving bad news, etc. And all of a sudden the anger comes. So I think those two things are really important, and recognizing and preparing for those emotions.
So sitting with it and even acknowledging it, like, I know
Absolutely.
you're angry.
Yeah, I know you're angry. And in
Okay.
many ways, that's a great point, Linda, because in many ways, what we know from research is that when a person is able to name that emotion that's happening, it helps them begin to manage their emotion.
Mhm,
So, saying, hey, I think you're angry. And not just to say you're angry, but to say, I think you're angry. And I can understand that. And just let the person sit with that and sit. And normally what they'll go is, hell yeah, I am. And this
mhm.
is why. Yeah.
Right. As opposed to don't be angry. Is
Yes.
not, "Why are
Oh,
you angry at me?"
yeah,
That's not the way
if you
people.
wanna ratchet up a person's anger, just say exactly that. Don't be angry.
But it's not such a big deal.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Right.
It
Well, these are great. Because how many people encounter difficult conversations at work? It's going to
absolutely,
happen all the time,
yeah,
and in your personal life.
absolutely, and, if you get to the actual reason why we're angry, the reason, the emotion of anger occurs actually is when someone gets in the way of an objective.
Hmm,
So a conversation, you could be putting something in which is preventing the person going somewhere, or moving to a point they want to get to. That's where the anger comes. And just to understand
yeah.
that, it's like, oh, okay.
Okay. So anger is a roadblock,
Yes.
and you can't always move it, but
No,
you have to deal with it.
you have to deal
It
with it.
has to be a detour.
Yes.
This is wonderful, because I know so many people will appreciate this information, and I like the way you spoke about even sitting with emotions,
Mm,
accepting them, and that is difficult for ourselves too, right? Even with our own anger. So I
Yeah.
think that's wonderful. Now, I always ask this question in this interview series because it is speak, sound, and look like a leader. What do you think is the essential skill? It could be something you mentioned already, but the essential skill for somebody to speak, sound, look, or act like a leader?
I think it's a great question. I think leadership is situational.
Hmm.
And I think it is important to understand the situation I'm walking into as a leader. And so sometimes a leader is walking into a situation where what is required is to build confidence and to give security, et cetera. So just say there's a crisis.
Hmm.
Now, how a leader communicates that is with empathy and also conveying confidence that they know what's going to happen, that they're in charge, et cetera. At other times as well, what a leader needs to convey is something a little bit different. And maybe it has to be a little firmer, a little direct. So I think what's important for me is understanding the context and then having a knowledge and the skills of how to use that context and how to show up.
Hmm. And like you said, situations are different.
Absolutely.
Being so, I'm assuming flexibility and adaptability is critical for a
Yeah.
leader.
Yeah. And then part of that, where I would come in with emotional intelligence is emotionally intelligent people can read a room. They can read
Hmm.
a situation. And they're also thinking about it not just in one dimension, but in many dimensions.
Hmm.
And so just say that you're walking out and a company is beginning to let people go. So just to have the knowledge, I've seen that done horribly, where a
Hmm.
leader came out was cold, and you know why they were nervous and they
Hmm.
just wanted to get it done with as quickly as possible. But if you can say, wow, to imagine what might be going on in people's minds,
Hmm.
the fear, the sadness, the anger, all of these, and to be able to hold a space for that. So to have awareness of that, that will help one be a much better communicator as a leader.
And I've heard because listening skills, of course, listening and observation skills are so important.
Yeah.
But in one of the books that I've read years ago, it was, and I alluded to it before, get into that person's movie, get
Yeah.
into their story.
Yeah.
So if you have to get up to speak to a company that everybody is being laid off,
Yeah.
get into their heads.
Yeah.
Don't just stay in your own head,
Yeah. Yeah.
because then you're not emotionally intelligent. Maybe about yourself, but about nobody else.
Absolutely. There's a technique that I love, which is, if you're in a very tense conversation, and very often when a person is speaking, you can kind of let the words land on you and it becomes personal and we become defensive. And
Mhm.
I always say to people, to leaders that I work with, is, can you just imagine the words coming out of their mouth and landing on the table, not on
Mm.
you? And then just get curious about them. Where are these coming from? What's
Mhm.
happening? What's happening with that other person? It
Mhm.
just allows a little more empathy, compassion,
Mhm.
perhaps, and a little bit of a space to respond more appropriately in the
Mhm.
situation.
Mhm. This is so critical every day. Even what you see on social media when people are posting things, so many people are not using emotional intelligence, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And you see how it escalates
Yes.
so quickly.
Very easy.
Irvin, how can people get in touch with you besides on LinkedIn?
So my website is copialeadership.com and my email is irvin@copialeadership.com. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I also have a YouTube channel with some videos there if you want to hear or listen more.
And they're wonderful videos. I've seen a lot of them. And I know there is so much you have to share that we cannot cover in this short period of time. But of course, reach out to Irvin because he has a wealth of information about emotional intelligence and very easy to talk to. So he is very emotionally intelligent. Thanks so much for sharing all of this with all of this information with us, Irvin. I really enjoyed speaking with you and having you share this information.
Thanks, Linda. I appreciate it too.
Sure. And please join us again in 2 weeks on October 24th when Kim Fabian, who is actually she's a chief, let me just think, chief experience officer at Elevator Leadership Consulting. And we're going to discuss how to build confidence and trust as a new leader, because that's also being emotionally intelligent if you're going to be a
Absolutely.
new leader. And until then, let's think about ways that perhaps we can raise our emotional intelligence several points after listening to what Irvin had to say today. Great to see you, Irvin. Everybody have a great day.